The bitter wind whipped through the valley as Daisy Reynolds collapsed against the wooden fence post, her frail body shaking from exhaustion and hunger, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face in the fading light of an October evening in 1875. She had walked for days, fleeing the cholera outbreak that had claimed her entire family in Kansas City. And now, at the edge of this small Wyoming town, her strength had finally given out. Quinn Lockhart noticed the slumped figure against his fence line as he rode in from the western pasture. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal or perhaps a vagrant looking to cause trouble. As he drew closer, the sight of a young woman barely more than 20 by his estimation huddled against his property line with nothing but a tattered dress and a small cloth bundle clutched to her chest stirred something in him. "Miss," Quinn called out, dismounting his chestnut stallion. "Miss, are you hurt?" Daisy startled at the deep voice, her eyes wide with fear as she tried to stand but fell back to her knees. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked from thirst. "I haven't eaten in 3 days. I'm not a thief. I need help." Quinn crouched before her, taking in her sunken cheeks and the desperation in her eyes. Without hesitation, he removed his canteen and offered it to her. "Drink slowly now," he cautioned as she grabbed it with trembling hands. After she had taken a few sips, Quinn made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "My ranch is just over that rise. Can you stand if I help you?" Daisy nodded weakly, and Quinn gently lifted her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. When it became clear she couldn't walk, he carefully placed her on his horse and led them back to his homestead. The Lazy L Ranch was modest by Wyoming standards, a sturdy 2-story house, a barn, stables, and several outbuildings, surrounded by acres of good grazing land. As they approached, Quinn's foreman, Hank Peterson, rushed out to meet them. "Boss, what in tarnation?" Hank stopped short at the sight of the half-conscious woman. "She's starving," Hank found her collapsed against the south fence line. Quinn lifted Daisy from the horse. "Tell Martha to prepare the spare room and some broth." Martha, Quinn's housekeeper since his parents died 5 years prior, was already at the door, her weathered face a mixture of concern and disapproval. "Mr. Lockhart, bringing a strange woman into this house. What will people say?" "They'll say I didn't leave a helpless woman to die in the cold," Quinn replied firmly, carrying Daisy inside. "And they can say whatever else they please." By morning, word had spread through the small town of Sweetwater Springs that Quinn Lockhart had brought a strange, bedraggled woman into his home. The whispers began at the general store and spread like wildfire through the church congregation and saloon alike. "Proper scandalous, if you ask me," Edith Winters, the banker's wife, declared as she selected fabric at the mercantile. "A single man taking in a woman like that, who knows what kind she is." "She looked half dead when I saw them ride in," countered Sam Wilson, who'd been delivering mail when Quinn returned. "Would you have him leave her to the wolves?" "Perhaps the pastor should pay a visit," suggested Mrs. Holloway, the mayor's wife. "Ensure everything is appropriate." While the town buzzed with gossip, Daisy slowly regained her strength in the quiet comfort of Quinn's home. Martha, despite her initial misgivings, couldn't help but warm to the young woman as she spoon-fed her broth and helped her bathe. "Where are you from, child?" Martha asked on the 3rd day as Daisy sat propped against pillows, finally able to feed herself. "Kansas City," Daisy replied softly. "My parents and younger brothers died of cholera last month. I stayed as long as I could, nursing them, but—" Her voice broke. "The landlord evicted me when I couldn't pay. Said the place needed to be burned clean anyway." Martha's face softened. "And you walked all the way here?" "I took the train as far as my coins would allow. Then I worked odd jobs when I could. I was heading to my mother's cousin in Montana, but—" Daisy looked down at her thin hands. "I didn't make it very far." That evening, Quinn joined Daisy for dinner, the first time she was well enough to sit at the table. He'd been giving her space, sleeping in the bunkhouse with his ranch hands to avoid impropriety, but he wanted to know more about the woman who had literally fallen at his doorstep. Quinn was not what Daisy had expected. At 32, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his sun-weathered face handsome in a rugged way, with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see right through pretense. Unlike many men she'd encountered on her journey, he looked at her face when speaking, not at her body. "Miss Reynolds," he began, cutting into his steak, "Martha tells me you were bound for Montana." "Yes, sir. My mother's cousin has a millinery shop in Helena." "That's still a considerable journey, and winter's coming on fast in the mountains." Daisy's shoulders slumped. "I know. I thought I could make it before the first snow, but—" "You're welcome to stay here until spring," Quinn offered, surprising himself with the words. "I can offer you honest work. Martha could use help with the house, and come spring, we'll see about getting you safely to Helena." Daisy stared at him, suspicion flaring. She'd had enough offers of help from men during her journey to know they usually expected payment of a different kind. Reading her expression, Quinn quickly added, "You'd have your own room, of course, proper wages. I run a respectable ranch, Miss Reynolds." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Daisy asked plainly. Quinn was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to the portrait of his parents hanging on the wall. "5 years ago, I was riding fence in a blizzard and took a bad fall. Broke my leg miles from home. Would have frozen to death if a passing Shoshone hunter hadn't found me and brought me to his camp. I've never forgotten that kindness." He looked back at her. "Sometimes, Miss Reynolds, people just need help." The next day, Pastor Thomas Whitfield arrived unannounced, ostensibly to welcome the newcomer, but clearly to investigate the rumors swirling through town. Quinn received him in the parlor while Daisy was helping Martha with laundry. "The Lord commands us to be charitable, of course," Pastor Whitfield said after preliminaries, "but one must be prudent. A young woman with no references, no family connections here. There are establishments in Cheyenne for such unfortunates." Quinn's jaw tightened. "Miss Reynolds lost her family to disease and was traveling to relatives when misfortune befell her. She's a guest in my home until she recovers her strength, and then an employee if she chooses to stay until spring." "And your reputation, Quinn? What of that? People talk." "Let them," Quinn replied evenly. "I know what's right." When Daisy entered with tea, the pastor scrutinized her closely. To his surprise, despite her still thin frame, she carried herself with dignity, her speech educated, her manners refined. By the time he left, his concerns had somewhat eased, though he made it clear to Quinn that the situation remained irregular. As November turned cold, Daisy found herself settling into life at the Lazy L. Her strength returned, and with it, her natural vitality. She proved to be not only helpful with household tasks, but also surprisingly knowledgeable about bookkeeping skills learned in her father's hardware store before his death. "These figures don't add up," she said one evening, looking over the ranch ledgers Quinn had been struggling with. "You're being charged twice for the same feed order." Quinn leaned over her shoulder to see where she was pointing, close enough that Daisy could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him. "I never had a head for numbers," he admitted. "My foreman usually handles this, but Hank's reading isn't what it used to be." "I could help," Daisy offered. "I kept my father's books for 3 years." Quinn studied her face, noting how her cheeks had filled out, how her brown eyes now sparkled with intelligence rather than fever. "I'd appreciate that," he said softly. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the ledger, and both pretended not to notice the sudden electricity between them. Meanwhile, Sweetwater Springs continued to buzz with speculation. When Quinn and Daisy attended Sunday services together for the first time, the congregation barely heard Pastor Whitfield's sermon for all the whispering and sidelong glances. "The nerve, bringing her to church," Edith Winters hissed to her husband. "At least they're in church," the banker replied pragmatically. After the service, most townsfolk kept their distance, though a few, like the blacksmith's wife, Sarah Cooper, made a point of introducing herself to Daisy. "Don't mind them," Sarah said, nodding toward the clusters of whispering women. "New faces are rare enough to cause a stir, especially pretty ones." Daisy blushed. "Thank you for your kindness." "Why don't you join our quilting circle on Thursday?" Sarah suggested. "It's at my home, 2 o'clock." The invitation was a lifeline to normalcy that Daisy gratefully accepted. Quinn observed the interaction with relief. He'd been worried about bringing Daisy to town, knowing how vicious small-town gossip could be, but he couldn't keep her hidden away like some shameful secret. Besides, he found himself increasingly proud to be seen with her. As they rode home in Quinn's wagon, Daisy was quieter than usual. "I'm sorry about the reception," Quinn finally said. "Small towns can be suspicious of outsiders," Daisy supplied. "I understand. I'm grateful to Mrs. Cooper for her kindness. Sarah's good people. Her husband Ben's one of the few who stood by me when I took over the ranch after my father died. Most thought I was too young, would lose everything within a year." Daisy glanced at him. "How old were you?" 27, had to grow up fast. The wagon hit a rut, jolting them together momentarily. Quinn steadied her with a hand on her arm, the touch lingering a second longer than necessary. "Thank you," Daisy said, unsure if she meant for the steadying hand or everything else. December brought heavy snow and long evenings by the fire. With outdoor work limited, Quinn spent more time in the house, often finding Daisy reading from his modest library or teaching Martha's young granddaughter, Lily, her letters when the child visited on Christmas Eve. The ranch hands were given the day off to visit family or carouse in town. Martha had left to spend the holiday with her daughter's family, leaving Quinn and Daisy alone for the first time. They prepared a simple meal together, moving around the kitchen in comfortable synchronicity. Afterward, Quinn surprised Daisy with a small gift, a journal bound in soft leather. "I noticed you writing on scraps of paper," he explained as she ran her fingers over the cover. "Thought you might like something proper." "It's beautiful," Daisy whispered, touched by his thoughtfulness, "but I didn't get you anything." "You've reorganized my accounts, improved my meals, and brought conversation to a house that was too quiet for too long," Quinn said. "That's gift enough." Daisy impulsively reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for saving my life, Quinn Lockhart." His eyes met hers, and for a charged moment, neither spoke. Then Quinn cleared his throat and stood to stoke the fire, the moment passing like a shadow. That night, as Daisy wrote in her new journal, she confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Quinn. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Come spring, she was supposed to continue to Montana, but the thought of leaving now filled her with dread. Across the hall, Quinn lay awake, wrestling with similar thoughts. He'd brought Daisy in out of compassion, offered her a job out of practicality, but somewhere along the way, she'd become essential to him. The thought of her leaving made his chest ache in a way he'd never experienced. January brought a brutal blizzard that trapped them indoors for 3 days. With the ranch hands safely housed in the bunkhouse and Martha still visiting family, Quinn and Daisy were forced into closer quarters than propriety would normally allow. On the second night, with the wind howling outside, they sat before the fire playing checkers, a glass of whiskey for him and tea for her. "Your move," Quinn said, watching as Daisy studied the board with the same concentration she gave to his account books. She moved her piece and looked up to find him watching her, not the game. "What is it?" "I was just thinking that blizzard was the best thing to happen to this ranch in years." Daisy raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "It brought you here." The whiskey had loosened his tongue just enough for honesty. "I never thought much about this house being empty until suddenly it wasn't." Daisy's heart quickened. "Quinn, I know you plan to leave come spring," he continued. "You have family waiting, a life to rebuild, but I want you to know that you have a place here if you want it." "As your housekeeper?" Daisy asked carefully. Quinn set his glass down and moved to kneel beside her chair. "As whatever you want to be in my life, Daisy. I know it's too soon and I'm not asking for promises. Just consider staying." Before she could respond, a tremendous crash shook the house as a tree branch broke through the kitchen window. The moment shattered, they rushed to deal with the emergency, working together to board up the window against the howling storm. The next day, the blizzard finally broke, and with it, the strange intimacy of their isolation. Ranch hands needing direction, animals requiring care, and the thousand tasks of running a working ranch demanded Quinn's attention. Daisy threw herself into helping where she could, but the unfinished conversation hung between them like a ghost. By February, Daisy had become a fixture at the Lazy L, and gradually the scandal of her arrival faded in town. She regularly attended the quilting circle, where Sarah Cooper and a few other women had become true friends. She even helped organize a small Valentine's Day social to raise money for new books for the schoolhouse. It was at this social that the first real challenge to her place in Quinn's life appeared in the form of Vivian Powell, the new schoolteacher who had arrived in January. Beautiful, educated, and from a good Boston family, Vivian set her sights on Quinn immediately. "Mr. Lockhart," Vivian greeted, intercepting Quinn as he returned with punch for Daisy. "I've been hoping to speak with you about supporting our school library." Quinn nodded politely. "Miss Powell, I'd be happy to contribute. Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner sometime," Vivian suggested, laying a gloved hand on his arm. "I have some innovative ideas about education that I think would interest a forward-thinking rancher like yourself." From across the room, Daisy watched the interaction, her stomach twisting uncomfortably. Vivian Powell represented everything Daisy was not: secure, respectable, untouched by scandal. The kind of woman a successful rancher should court. When Quinn returned with the punch, his expression was unreadable. "Miss Powell seems eager to discuss education," Daisy said lightly. "She's passionate about her students," Quinn replied neutrally. "She's also very beautiful," Daisy added, testing the waters. Quinn's eyes found hers. "I hadn't noticed." The simple statement warmed Daisy more than the entire pot-bellied stove heating the town hall. As February turned to March, the first signs of spring began to appear. The snow melted, revealing muddy roads and green shoots. With the changing season came the unspoken question of Daisy's future. One afternoon, as Daisy hung laundry in the strengthening sunshine, she overheard a conversation between Quinn and Hank that froze her in place. "Trail boss from the Carson outfit stopped by," Hank was saying. "They're driving a herd north to Montana in April. Said they'd be happy to let Miss Reynolds travel with them as far as Helena. Have a couple of women already making the journey." "What did you tell him?" Quinn's voice was carefully neutral. "Said I'd ask you, of course." There was a long silence before Quinn replied. "Proper escort would be good. Safer than her traveling alone." Daisy's heart sank. Despite their Christmas Eve conversation, despite the countless small moments of connection over the past months, Quinn was still planning for her departure. Perhaps he'd reconsidered his feelings, or maybe Vivian Powell's obvious interest had reminded him of what he could have: a respectable woman without Daisy's baggage. That night at dinner, Daisy was unusually quiet. When Quinn mentioned the cattle drive to Montana, presenting it as an opportunity rather than a decision, she merely nodded. "If that's what you think best," she said softly, missing the disappointment that flashed across his face at her apparent eagerness to leave. The misunderstanding might have festered if not for Martha, who had observed the growing feelings between the two with a mixture of concern and approval. The next morning, she cornered Quinn in his study. "You're a fool, Quinn Lockhart," she declared without preamble. Quinn looked up from his papers, startled. "Excuse me? That girl loves you and you love her, yet you're arranging for her to travel hundreds of miles away instead of asking her to stay." "I did ask her to stay," Quinn protested. "Back during the blizzard, she never gave me an answer." Martha crossed her arms. "And have you asked her since? Or have you just assumed she wants to leave because that's easier than risking your heart?" Quinn had no answer for that. Meanwhile, Daisy had made her decision. If Quinn wanted her to go, she would go with dignity. She wrote to her mother's cousin in Helena, announcing her planned arrival. The woman's response was warm and welcoming, which should have been comforting but only made Daisy feel more desolate. As the departure date approached, a tension settled over the ranch. Quinn and Daisy circled each other like wary dancers, each misreading the other's reticence as confirmation of their fears. The situation came to a head when Vivian Powell invited Quinn to the spring social as her escort. Quinn declined, but word reached Daisy through the quilting circle that Vivian was telling everyone they had an understanding. That evening, as Daisy prepared dinner, she finally broke the strained silence. "I heard congratulations are in order." Quinn looked up from the mail he was sorting. "For what?" "Your understanding with Miss Powell." Quinn's brow furrowed. "What understanding?" "She's telling everyone you two are practically engaged," Daisy said, unable to keep the hurt from her voice. "That's ridiculous." Quinn stood, approaching the kitchen table where Daisy was aggressively kneading bread dough. "I've spoken to the woman maybe 3 times, always about the school." "She would make you a suitable wife," Daisy said, not looking up. "Respectable, educated. No scandal attached to her name." "Daisy, look at me." When she didn't, Quinn gently lifted her chin with his flour-dusted fingers. "I don't want suitable, I don't want respectable, I want you." Daisy's eyes filled with tears. "Then why are you sending me away?" "I'm not, I thought." Quinn took a deep breath. "I thought you wanted to go. You never answered when I asked you to stay, and when I mentioned the cattle drive, you seemed relieved." "I thought that was your way of telling me it was time to move on," Daisy whispered. "That you'd reconsidered." Quinn shook his head, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "We're a pair of fools, aren't we?" "Martha may have mentioned that," Daisy admitted, a matching smile beginning to form. Quinn took her flour-covered hands in his. "Daisy Reynolds, I'm asking you properly now, will you stay?" "Not as my housekeeper or bookkeeper, but as my wife. I love you. I think I've loved you since I found you crying at my fence line." Daisy's heart soared. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll stay." Quinn pulled her into his arms, not caring about the flour that now covered his shirt, and kissed her with all the pent-up longing of the past months. The news of their engagement spread through Sweetwater Springs even faster than the original scandal of Daisy's arrival. Reactions were mixed. Some, like Sarah Cooper, were genuinely happy for them. Others, like Edith Winters, predicted disaster. And Vivian Powell requested a transfer to a school in Colorado. Pastor Whitfield agreed to perform the ceremony, though not without a lengthy counseling session during which he seemed determined to ensure Daisy wasn't with child. When assured this wasn't the case, he reluctantly gave his blessing. They married in April, just as the wildflowers began to carpet the hills around the ranch. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by the ranch hands, Martha and her family, and the few townspeople who had come to accept and even like Daisy. "Who would have thought," Sarah whispered to her husband during the reception, "that the half-dead girl he found at his fence would end up mistress of the Lazy L?" "Quinn knew," Ben replied confidently. "Man's got good instincts." As for Quinn and Daisy, they were too absorbed in each other to care much about the gossip that would eventually fade. That night, as they stood on the porch of the home that was now truly theirs together, Quinn wrapped his arms around his bride. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Daisy turned in his embrace, looking up at the man who had saved her life and then captured her heart. "More than I ever thought possible." "You know what today is?" Quinn asked. "Besides our wedding day," Daisy shook her head. "Exactly 6 months since I found you at the fence line," Quinn said. "Best decision I ever made, bringing you home." "Even though it shocked the whole town," Daisy teased. "Especially because of that," Quinn laughed, drawing her closer. "Let's keep shocking them for the next 50 years. 5 years later, the scandal was all but forgotten. The Lazy L had prospered under their joint management, expanding to become one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Daisy and Quinn had 2 children, a 3-year-old son with his father's gray eyes and a daughter just learning to walk. Occasionally, a newcomer to town would hear whispers of how the respectable Mrs. Lockhart had arrived starving and in rags, and how Quinn had defied convention to take her in. These days, the story was told with a touch of romance rather than scandal, a testament to love at first sight. On the anniversary of her arrival each year, Quinn and Daisy would ride out to the south fence line where they had first met, sometimes with their children, sometimes alone. They would picnic there, remembering how close they had come to never finding each other at all. "You ever regret it?" Daisy asked on one such anniversary, watching their son chase butterflies through the grass. Taking in a stranger, facing all that gossip, Quinn pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a single moment. Some decisions change everything, Daisy. Finding you crying at that fence changed my whole world for the better." And as they sat together on the blanket, watching the sun set over the land they both loved, Daisy reflected on the journey that had brought her here from desperate grief to overwhelming joy, from starvation to abundance, from loneliness to love. The fence that had once been her last hope had become the beginning of everything.